Geomancy ball at Castle Cell tried it. Our trip to Moldavia had been very positive for all our endeavors, which put everyone in a great mood for the Geomancy ball on the final night. Cheesy and I were dressed in our outfits when we met on our way down to the ballroom. Let me see, your acquisition. You're looking to acquire or gain an increase of wealth. But you know he's also known to lack compassion and generosity. In fact, he can represent the end of love in some circumstances. Cheesy looked at me and said, "Oh shit. Are you sure? Why didn't I see that?" Cheesy turned his attention to my outfit and said, "Okay, so you're Fortuna Major, Mr. Big Winner. What are you conveying?" To which I replied, "Great fortune achieved by my own devices." And Cheesy merely grunted, "Didn't get it." We arrived at the ballroom and there was a line-up at the door as each person was being introduced as their character to the Baroness. Magda and Krista were ahead of us in line. Magda was Puella, a girl of great beauty, compassion, feminine receptivity, and open to many adventures. Perfect, I thought. Krista was Caput Draconis, or the Dragon's Head. She was all about new beginnings, or a new cycle of adventure. It suited her to a T. The Baroness sat in a throne-like chair at the entrance to the room and Magda told us she was dressed as Aries, the Queen of Astrology. We were supposed to bow or curtsy as we walked past. Behind us was Uncle Sandu and Aunt Alexandria. He was Artist the White, which said he was open-minded to all things, but rather forgetful of others, and she was Via, the Road. I didn't know her very well yet and barely knew April and Alexei, but I knew Via was about active effort following a path driven toward destiny. Was she a megalomaniac? Time would tell. Ian was waiting for us as we came through the door and paid our respects to the Baroness. He was Letitia, the epitome of happiness, joy, and ecstasy as well as upward movement. I ignored the gender confusion because I was sure it was the sentiment he was after. Whether it was acceptable for men to assume what were considered feminine attributes in geomancy and vice versa would remain to be seen. As we approached, Ian made an awkward attempt at a little soft shoe two-step. "I'm happy feet," he said, alluding to the fact that Letitia was all about the feet. We joined the Jacks at a table. Marius was, of course, Rubius the Red. That guy was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Mischief was not out of the question, and there had to be some fire in the works. I thought it might be a bit out of character for Marius, but maybe he was trying to switch roles with Marion. Marion was Pure the boy. That suited him as Pure was aggressive, assertive, masculine, action, and even risky behavior bordering on cockiness. Perhaps they both want to play the same part. I saw April on the dance floor with Richard. Richard was Casa, which represented the prison. Limitations and boundaries such as a good Protestant general would command. Although Casa was not a perfect match for Richard because he was also known for acceptance of present circumstances, the concept of being locked in came to mind, and I thought perhaps locked up would be better. April was Via, just as her mother was. Great powers and destiny must run in the family. Alexei was dancing with someone unfamiliar to me, and Henry and his date were next to them. I thought it was an interesting choice for Alexei to choose Populus. Populus represents the people and being a part of a great mass of people. Effort is all about team play and coordination. This was his Soviet upbringing as well as his father's influence. After all, if your father was a general in post-war Russia, wouldn't you have some very socialistic views among your communistic views? As usual, Henry was living up to Cheesy's nickname of obnoxious little dickhead, or OLD for short, and chose Tristitia because she represented sorrow, sadness, and trouble, which I assumed he saw himself inflicting on others. Aside from the gender, that really was Henry, and for that matter, Richard too from an external perspective. But Richard had a desire to profit from it as well. Sandy was very appropriately outfitted as Fortuna Minor, or the Lesser Fortune. Swiftly passing opportunities that must be grasped without delay to build a steadily growing empire. Although I would never describe Sandy as a capitalist, he did have a penchant for acquiring more wealth than he ever dreamed of or even desired. Dick was Conjunctio, which represented crossroads. It was about choice, choosing and the decision at hand. Indecision makes things harder for Conjunctio, so he had best shit or get off the pot. Conjunctio says choose. Now if I was a gambling man, I would put money on the fact that Dick had designs on Dr. Sue, but that something was blocking his way. It could be his military career, his grandfather or father, the age difference, or perhaps he was all in, but she wasn't. I took a look at what Dr. Sue had chosen, and she was Artist the White. Artist is open to intellectual and spiritual pursuits, but rather forgetful when it comes to thoughts of anything else. Dr. Sue clearly chose this for herself, and I think Dick may have preferred her to be Puella the girl. She already represented many of these attributes to him. Darla was Rubius the Red, just like Marius, and it was just as appropriate. She was going to make a fabulous ringmaster in Las Vegas, but right then she seemed to be organizing something on the dance floor. Two people brought out a large floor mat that they unrolled over the dance floor. The mat covered the entire hall from end to end and side to side, and it seemed to have a shield laid out on it just as Krista had used when she showed us geomancy. Darla took center stage on the dance floor, accompanied by the pets, Mr. Whiskers, Peepers and Thief, who were wearing matching outfits with their masters, tailored to their unique physiques. Welcome everyone to the Great Shield. Baroness, will you come forward and cast the First Mother? And a crowd cheered as the Baroness stood at her chair and took the divination dice from one of the people helping out. The Baroness gave the dice a throw onto the Great Shield and Darla read out the results. Even, odd, odd. she announced, and the crowd cheered. Fortuna Minor is the first mother tonight. Everyone dressed as Fortuna Minor come down and stand in the first mother's position. They were handed a small gift bag when they arrived. We cheered for Sandy as he went down to stand in the square with several other people from the crowd. I'm not sure how many people were in attendance, but there were lots of people from the local area. The Baroness continued to roll the dice for the other mothers while Darla announced who they were. By the time they reached the daughters, the momentum began to pick up. After all, it was just a calculation away, and I'm sure some of the bright ones have already calculated the judge and witness. When all was said and done, the judge was announced. Darla took the microphone in one hand and lifted the other to quiet the crowd. The judge for tonight's Great Shield is Conjuncture the Crossroads. And Dick nearly jumped out of his skin trying to get to the judge's square. He was the only Conjuncture. And finally, the sentence for tonight's Great Shield is Artis the White. Darla announced. When I realized who was Artis, I think I actually gasped out loud and I poked Cheesy in the ribs. He shook his head with acknowledgement and smiled. Dr. Sue was one of the artists, as was Uncle Sandu and several other guests. If the decision was in Dick's hands, I wouldn't think there would be any indecision. That made Cheesy, and I think if this didn't send their romance over the top, then there was a major blockage somewhere. The rest of the evening was much of a blur, but I'm sure we all had a great time on that final night.